Hello YouTube, this is Joseph. Today I'm bringing Saskia the Unyielding. She is 1 swamp, 1 mountain, 1 forest, and 1 plains to cast her. She's a human soldier with vigilance, haste, and when she enters the battlefield you choose a player, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, deals that much damage to the chosen player. So the way I'm choosing to build her is with damage doubling effects that enable me to swing in for 5 damage and then double it to 10, double it to 20, and win through the combat step. I've seen a lot of different people run the deck quite differently. Some people run Infect with Saskia, others do a token theme. I've even seen melee as a possible mechanic to work around, trying to spread out little bits of damage to all your opponents with like Blade of Selves and different cards. So that's just a little bit of an introduction on Saskia. The first creature we're running is Elvish Piper and Sneak Attack. These are both very important to cheat cards into play. You'll note that they both have just 1 mountain or 1 forest to put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. The next category that's very important for this deck is haste enablers. You want your creatures to be able to come in and have an immediate impact. It can do something right away for those really explosive plays. So we have the Crossroads, Lightning Greaves, which also gives your creature Shroud, good way to protect. If creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end turn. Well, to note, Saskia is at 3 power and the Hunt Caller is at 5, so that already equals 8. And any other creatures you may have on the battlefield. Then we have Dragon Lord Colligan. He gives all other creatures haste, and he is haste himself. He's both good as an attacker and just enabling fast, aggressive plays. Now, God of Revels is not only a haste enabler, he also doubles damage. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the creature's power. This is very good with what I'm trying to do with the deck. So in this next category we go through all our effects that double damage. Curse of Bloodletting. This is something that you can attach to a player as a curse. If Source would deal damage to enchanted player, deals double that damage to that player instead. Now take special note that this is not necessarily from your creatures, from any player doing damage to that player gets doubled. Now Gratuitous Violence does a very similar thing. If a creature you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage instead. It's kind of like another doubling effect. I'm choosing not to run Dictate of the Twin Gods because that card also allows your opponents to double damage towards you, and it can really backfire if your explosive play does not work out or if they wipe the board or do something chaotic. So another one we have is True Conviction. Double Strike and Lifelink is very good for the deck, just to get back some of the life that you'll lose in the early game from some of the other cards in the deck, as well as just, it kind of, just doubles your damage. Hydra Omnivore. Whenever you do damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each opponent. Now this is a very important card for the deck. Don't need to explain why. Aurelia gives you an additional combat step. And Gisela doubles damage and halves the damage that you take. Gisela and Aurelia are also both effective attackers, so they're just very good for the overall synergy of the deck. It's very Boros heavy in that retrospect. Now this next category of cards are just my utility creatures. Creatures that don't necessarily have immediate value when they hit the battlefield. They don't have ETB triggers, but they're just very threatening creatures. So we have Baneslayer. She's flying, first strike, lifelink, and protections from dragons and demons is quite often relevant for a lot of the commanders. Stormbreath Dragon, he has haste and protection from white, and the cool thing with him is if you make a Monstrosity 3 later on in the game, it can deal damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. And, you know, that can actually do a lot of damage to certain decks. Thundermaw Hellkite, it taps every creature with flying, and it enables you to swing in with all your creatures and potentially get the win. See, he's very useful. Phyrexian Hydra. This is one that I was on the fence about putting in, but I think I want to playtest with him, and I think he's very effective. You know, in the best case scenario, if the field is open or if you had a way for him to be unblocked or whatever, he'll do 7 infect damage. But if you can double that damage by any card, whatever it may be, he'll hit for 14 infect damage, right? Like, that is a lot of damage and can just outright kill a player on the spot. Sigarda, Host of Herons. This is a card that kind of just makes it so my opponent can't force me to sacrifice creatures, and she has hexproof, so she's a threat that's hard to get rid of, and she'll stay on the battlefield for a long time. And then Avacyn, Angel of Hope. She makes all your things indestructible, and she has Vigilance. Vigilance, I think, is an underrated ability. My deck wants to attack with my creatures, so having a few creatures with Vigilance that can both attack and block is very key. Next is Void Winnower. Your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs, and your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. So this enables you to potentially get through with combat damage. Like, tokens are technically 0 mana costs. You can't have tokens chump block your big creatures. And a lot of the board wipes and spot remove that will really hurt the deck are even casting costs. So it gets around a lot of things. It turns off like half your opponent's deck. And he's a big creature. If you play this with sneak attack even, and you can just hit somebody for 11, like, and double that, like, that's 22 damage out of nowhere. That's a lot of damage for one single mana with sneak attack out. Now this next batch of creatures are kind of my spot removal creatures. They have ETB triggers that do something useful for the overall purpose of the deck. So Inferno Titan comes in, does 3 damage to a player or creature. You can divide it any way you choose. If you have just Sell Out or some other card that doubles the damage, it comes into play and does 6 to something, so it does a lot more. And he has a fire breathing ability, so he can get really big with the extra mana that you're not using. Bane of Bala Ged. This is an uncommon that I haven't seen in any deck. I think it's an underrated card. It doesn't have Annihilator, but it has something very similar. Whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So instead of sacrificing creatures with Annihilator, this just exiles them out of the game. And this is good against any deck that has a lot of graveyard recursion or whatnot. So he is an underrated card. Worldbreaker. I don't have Acidic Slime in the deck, and I don't have that many cards to remove artifacts or enchantments. So this is just important to have a card to exile an artifact or enchantment. So Angel of Despair enters the battlefield, you destroy a permanent. Dragon Lord Atarka. He does 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker, and he's got trample, so he can usually get through for some damage. He's big, hard to deal with. And Bulgarian Hellkite. Bulgarian Hellkite can be flashed in, does 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. Again, if you have a way of doubling damage, this can come in and do 10 damage to something as it enters the battlefield. And if you have a haste enabler in it, you have double damaging effect. It can also attack for 10. So this thing could just do a lot of damage immediately when it hits the field. An Ashen Rider. This is like 2 other ends on the stick. When it enters the battlefield and when it dies, you exile target permanent. So now we're entering our ramp spells. I believe I have 13 ramp and 13 card draw spells, so it's very heavy on these 2 categories because it is absolutely important that you fix your mana properly and that you're able to constantly be drawing cards and keeping your momentum going, because this is a deck that runs a lot of high CMC cards, and if you don't ramp properly, you can just fall behind, and the worst thing you can have with a 4-color commander is just get mana screwed or run out of gas early in the games. I don't want that to happen. So Burgeoning is very good when you're drawing lots of cards because it will let you play numerous lands when your opponents play lands. Exploration, you can play additional land on each of your turns. Golgari Signet is the only Signet I'm running, mostly because all of my card draw and ramp are typically black and green, so I want to fix my mana to specifically have those colors. Cold Steel Heart for the same purpose. It can enter the battlefield and I could choose whichever color I need at the time. It enters tapped, unfortunately, but it still enables you to play Saskia on turn 3, a full turn early. So I think it's a must-have. Fell War Stone. It's like a reflecting pool, but on a rock. Rampant Growth. I need Nature's Lore. I don't have it yet in the deck, so this is kind of my placeholder. This searches for a basic land. Nature's Lore would search out for a forest card and put it into the battlefield. Farseek puts any plains, island, swamp, or mountain card into play. Sakura Tribe Elder. Komoda's Reach. Cultivate. Sky Shroud Claim. This searches for 2 forest cards and put them into play. They don't come into play tapped, so very good ramp spell. Miari's Wake. This pumps all your creatures by 1, and whenever you tap a land for mana, you add additional color. Sylvan Library. Lets you draw an additional 2 cards per turn if you choose. It is painful though, because you do lose a lot of life, but it's a very good card to have in any green deck. Painful Truce. This is a card I think is underrated as well. In any 3 or 4 color, or even 5 color commander deck, this basically reads draw 3 cards, lose 3 life. So all of my card draw spells that are specifically draw me cards, draw me at least 3. Hunter's Insight, for example. You choose a creature you control. When that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you draw that many cards. Well, as you saw, most of my creatures have power 5 or greater. So this could, in the ideal world, at least draw me 5 cards. Sometimes up to 8 if like Avacyn attacks, or Dragonlord Atarka or something. So this can really refill your hand out of nowhere. Elemental Bond. Every one of my creatures is power 3 or greater, except for a couple utility ones, but for the most part they are. And this can also synergize well with Saskia because he is 3 power. So the very worst, you always have a target to draw a card. Ambition's Cost and Ancient Craving. They both draw 3 cards, lose 3 life. And of course, Harmonize. Draw 3 cards and no downside. Now, Miri's Guile is similar to Sylvan Library or Sensei's Divining Top in the sense that you can kind of look at the top 3 cards of your library and then choose which one you want to draw. You can make sure you're drawing land in the first few turns of the game, and that sets you up for the whole game. Like, it's a really powerful card. Now, I have a few cards that can recur things from the graveyard. I don't have many, but I feel like these are just... It's good to have cards that can in any commander deck, especially when you're running a lot of big creatures that are going to be removed. My creatures are often going to be the most threatening on the battlefield. So this returns a card from your graveyard to your hand. Sun Titan. There isn't enough cards in here that it makes it worth it to have Sun Titan. Plus, he's a vigilant 6/6 attacker. He works with the rest of the deck. Angel of Serenity. This is one that is definitely underrated. To note, when it enters the battlefield, you exile up to 3 other creatures from the battlefield and/or creatures from the graveyard. Now, the reason I put this in the graveyard recursion strategy is if you bring this into the field with Sneak Attack, you can exile 3 creatures from your graveyard, and then when she dies at the end of your turn, you get those cards back to your hand, and she essentially just drew you 3 cards. Or on the other side of the matter is if your opponent has 3 big creatures that are blocking you from attacking and potentially winning the game, she can exile those creatures to enable you to like win the game or something. And then Rise from the Dark Realms. I had this in Carador, and Carador really would like this, but I had too many cards I want to put in Carador, and I always have to figure out what to take out, and this is a card that really saves this deck. I'm not running too many board wipes in this deck, but a lot of other people are, and I can imagine my cards constantly dying. Once I playtest it more, we'll see if it's worth having in here, but just getting all creatures from all graveyards back onto the battlefield, this just like could win you the game, especially if you have a haste enabler. Now on to the spot removal. I run Path to Exile, one of my favorites, Swords to Plowshare. This deck I'm running Dismember. Because I'm running 4 colors, the ability just to pay 4 life with Phyrexian mana and then pay 1 colorless to give a creature -5/-5 till end turn, that can do a lot of work for you. Especially when you don't have the right colors and there's a big threat on the field, whatever it is, it can do a lot of work. Crows and Grip, having split second and being able to destroy artifact or enchantment, great card. Anguished Unmaking can hit anything. This one is my only card that's like able to hit anything, so it's very important that you save it to the right card and only use it when you have to. Crackling Doom. But the main reason I have it in here is that each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power, so the biggest threat they have will get destroyed. Some decks will utilize it better than others. This is one card that I would say if you want to take it out and put something else in, like Beast Within or whatever, do so. I just like the card. Fiery Confluence. This again is something that I think is underrated but really good with this deck. Mostly I want to use the first mode. Choose 1 damage to each creature, do it 3 times, so each creature takes 3 damage. Well, Saskia has 4 toughness. He won't die. All my creatures have like 5 or 6 toughness. They won't die. So this is basically kills all the little token creatures. And on the other side of things, you can destroy 3 artifacts if you want. And at the absolute very worst, just do 6 damage to each opponent. And if you have doubling damage effect, that could be 12 damage to each opponent. That could just win you the game. Like, it's a good card. If you have 2 of your doubling damage effects, this could potentially just wipe out a player, like, out of nowhere for 4 mana. It's very good. Very versatile. War Ancient's Tread is a very build-around-me card, and I put a lot of thought when I chose this one for the deck. A lot of my cards have 5 power. This card makes all my creatures into removal spells, basically. Merciless Eviction. This is my only board wipe in the deck. I have a lot of high CMC cards, and I don't really want to wipe the board. This is there because I can exile all artifacts and all enchantments. Now onto the lands. I'm running 2 plains, 2 mountains, 2 swamp, and 2 forest. I'm running 2 of each of the basic lands because there's a pretty even split. You can change this. I mean, green is most important in the early game to ramp. Black is best in the early to mid game for card draw. Red and white are most important for winning the game because a lot of your big creatures are red and white, and that's why this deck is very tricky with mana base. So I'm running Grasslands, Rocky Tar Pit, Bloodstained Mire, and Crows and Verge as my 4 fetch lands. It's more of a budget version. If you can afford the other fetch lands, of course run them. I have 10 lands that can be searched for with any of the fetch lands, so Murmuring Bosk is a forest, and has all 3 of the most important colors in the early game. So, very good. Canopy Vista, Sacred Foundry, Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, Stomping Ground, Temple Garden, Smoldering Marsh, Cinder Glade, Godless Shrine. So those are all my searchable lands. And I'm also running Battlefield Forge, Sulphurous Springs, Isolated Chapel, and Clifftop Retreat, because white, black, and red are important for my big creatures. Blighted Woodland can be sacrificed for 2 basic lands, so it's kind of like a cultivate. Wolf Run. This is another way of just making one of your creatures really big and gaining trample. Rogue's Passage makes a creature unblockable. Temple of False God. Slayer's Stronghold is very important because it gives haste and vigilance to a creature until end turn. 2 really relevant abilities. Battlements also gives a creature haste. And Hall of the Bandit Lord. Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion. Giving a creature double strike is also another way of doubling damage. It's great that I have a couple of utility lands. Mosswort Bridge. And then we have Exotic Orchard. So there you have it. That is my Saskia the Unyielding deck. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Leave suggestions, and I'd love to hear back from you. And thanks for all the support. Have a good week.